Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. And you're checking out the program on June 26, 2024. Glad to have you joining us on the program. We were going to do a show breaking down with Ian Whetstone, breaking down the contract, what we think might be the contract for Cam Hayward if he is indeed extended. But due to some weather issues on Ian's half, we're going to push that show back. Prayers out to Ian and his family. Hopefully everything is okay. Some weather issues in the area that he lives in is preventing him from being on the show. But as always, if you want to participate in the program, hit us with a like and a subscribe. I want to thank anybody who's hopped on the program and is going to be joining us on the program. Also, you can catch the show via YouTube. Do a search for the New Standard and Lance Williams and or Neil Coulong, or you can catch us via podcast by doing a search for the New Standard. I want to apologize for the background. Typically, I have a little backdrop on my background, but for some reason, I can't get the backdrop to load, but that's okay. And I want to kind of extend the conversation of this show based on what we were talking about on the previous show when we were talking about the Steelers wide receiver options and what the Steelers were looking for in a number two receiver, or did they have a number two receiver? And with that being said, that kind of assumes, if they have do they have a number two? It almost assumes, the way I stated it, do they have a number one wide receiver? And that's why I have to ask the question on this particular program as we dig into it: is George Pickens an actual number one? And, and digging into the numbers and trying to answer this question about a number two, it was a really illuminating in terms of what is actually a number one. And so I chose to look at some playoff teams in terms of a number one wide receiver. And we looked at it over the course of 2 years, 2022 and 2023. So we'll look at 2023. And for this particular program, I slotted George Pickens into the group of number one wide receivers. Now, the average, and let me give you who those number ones were by team in the AFC, and then we'll shift to the NFC. In the AFC, I said the number ones were Mark Andrews of the Ravens, Stephon Diggs of the Bills, Travis Kelce of the Chiefs. Interestingly enough, that there's two tight ends in there: Nico Collins of the Texans, Amari Cooper of the Browns, Tyreek Hill of the Dolphins, and George Pickens. In terms of receptions, that group averaged 83 receptions. In terms of targets, that group averaged 122 targets, 1,171 yards, and 14 yards per catch. And the catch percentage for that group, as I look at the numbers here, the catch percentage for that group was 70%. So essentially, these are guys that are getting spammed and catching the ball. And on the NFC side, a name that a lot of people are familiar with and has come up a lot in the offseason for the Steelers is Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk's name has come up as a guy that the Steelers would love to sign, rumored that the Steelers would love to sign, the fan base would love to sign. We've seen that name come up, and he's listed in terms of my chart in the number one wide receiver group on the NFC side. And looking at the NFC number one wide receivers of the playoff teams: Brandon Ayuk, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Evans, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua, and Jalen Reed. In terms of receptions, the average number of receptions for a number one wide receiver for NFC playoff teams, 98. Targets, 143. Yards, 1,371. Yards per catch, 14. And a catch percentage of 68%, meaning did you catch your targets? If you were targeted, what was the percentage of targets that you caught? And again, you're checking out the new standard. Big up to Mr. Tummy. And Mr. Tummy, let me jump into Mr. Tummy's comment. And he said, if 1, 2, and 3 means prioritizing who's on the team, then yes, Pickens is the new number 1. Mr. Tummy also said, if number 1 means compared to other teams, then we have a few 2s and 3s. And that's a great point. And that's a level of specificity that I'm glad that Mr. Tummy added, because he's absolutely right. And he stole a little bit of my thunder, because if you're looking at in terms of just the Steelers, and if that definition is the best wide receiver or best receiving option on your team, then George Pickens is a 1. But I think we both understand it as Mr. Tummy. When people talk about 1, 2, or 3 receivers in the media, typically it's talked about your ranking and standing in the league. Are you a number 1 wide receiver in the league? Are you a guy that dictates coverage? Are you a guy that spams targets? Are you a guy that has spam like production, gets a bunch of yards? Are you a guy that can run routes anywhere on the football field? Are you a guy that's a high volume target guy and a guy that is going to get catches and catch the ball when he's being high targeted? And Robert, you might have missed it on the top of the program. Ian had some weather issues in his area and is unable to come onto the show. I know I had scheduled a show for the day, so I just wanted to dig into a program and kind of dig back into this wide receiver issue. We'll be coming back with Ian sometime later as he gets the situation handled. But thanks to Ian for even wanting to come onto the show. But we're going to come back on with Ian and try to break down this Cam Hayward contract. Always, you're checking out the new standard. You're checking out the program on June 26th, NBA draft night. And I just want to say congratulations to all those kids and all those families who are chased the dream and are getting drafted. And as a Laker fan, I'm pretty excited that we're going to get Bronny James. That's cap. I'll just say that's this lid right here that I'm touching. That's cap. But let's jump back to, and thank you, Mr. Tummy, for your comments. This definition of a number 1. I think when I'm talking about a number 1 wide receiver, I'm talking about from the standpoint of the National Football League. Are you considered a number 1 in a National Football League? And does coverage get dictated as a result of that? When I look at the stats of some of these players, the Andrews, the Diggs, the Kelseys, the Amos, Ross St. Brown, Brandon Ayuk, CeeDee Lamb, when you look at the targets alone, CeeDee Lamb was targeted 75 more times than George Pickens. And of course, that is going to be a function of your offense. And a better way to look at it, and I might put this in the spreadsheet, is what percentage of your targets did you make up in terms of a number 1 wide receiver? You look at George Pickens, he got 106 targets. I think the Steelers threw the ball 540 times, if I'm not mistaken. So he ate up a good portion of those targets. And when you look at that percentage, that's about 23% of the targets. And I would bet that if you looked at CeeDee Lamb's target percentage, it's probably around 25%, somewhere around there, 25 to 27%. So from a volume perspective, George Pickens meets that number in terms of percentage of your passing game in your offense. I think where George Pickens does not establish, so let me just say it really clearly, just so there's no confusion. I do not think George Pickens is a number 1 wide receiver. When you look at his production, I don't think you can justify it. And the Steelers, on average, threw the ball about 31 times a game. And somebody has got to get those targets. Now, you look at the Steelers roster right now, you have George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth as your number one and number two targets. When you look at number one wide receivers across playoff teams in the AFC and NFC, these guys are getting targeted anywhere between 8 to 10 times a game. I'm not sure, with a catch percentage of only 60%, that it warrants targeting George Pickens 10 times. George Pickens at this point, I think, needs to add more polish to his game, and he leaves stuff on the field. If you're going to throw it to somebody 181 times, you better catch it like CeeDee Lamb 75% of those times. Now, again, that's going to be a factor of the offense, route depth, but it also says something about CeeDee Lamb getting open, because he still had almost 1,800 yards receiving and averaged 13 yards a catch. Brandon Ayuk got targeted 105 times, which is low, but he averaged 18 yards a catch and 1,342 yards. Pickens averaged 18.1. What you see right now, to me, when I look at George Pickens is a contested catch, big play receiver that runs a limited route tree. Now, I'm not going to knock him for that. He's still a very young player, but I think for George Pickens to develop into a number one, he has to run routes at all depths, and he has to be a chain stick mover. I mean, number one wide receivers move the chains. They catch it in the intermediate areas of the field. They run after the catch. They catch the deep ball. They catch it in the red zone. Number one guys that are getting spam targets like some of these guys, they do everything. Puka Nacua already does everything. He got 160 targets, I believe, as a rookie. A.J. Brown, 158 targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 164. CeeDee Lamb, 181. Tyreek Hill, 171. Now, again, because the Steelers only throw the ball 31 times a game, he may not get 10 targets a game. It may not happen. But even if you throw it just 31 times a game, which was on the low end of the National Football thing, I think it ranked about 28th, 26th, somewhere around there, it's still 31 targets. And you're looking at the Steelers, you figure, even if George Pickens got to 10, Freiermuth gets 8, 6 to 8, you still got 15 more targets. Are you going to give them to the backs and whoever this presumably this number 2 or number 3 receiver will be on the Steelers? But right now, as much as the Steelers need a number 2, what's up, Marcus J? Big up to you, my guy. As much as and Marcus J, I am watching this trash ass draft. I mean, come on, man. Let me quick sidebar real quick. You know a draft is ass when two dudes go 1-2 from France. Come on, man. Wemby is a freak. Tony Parker was a freak. But come on, man. Two dudes from France. Richache? I mean, come on, man. That sounds like a dance. Richache. Richache. Let's read. Chache. Read. Let's read. Chache. I mean, come on, man. That's my sidebar for the NBA draft. So, yes, Marcus J, I'm a huge hoop fan. I'm a Laker fan. I want to see if Bronny gets picked 17. That's why I'm watching the draft. But right now, if you look at the Steeler offense, as much as the Steelers need a number 2, they need George Pickens to be a legitimate number 1. They need him to rise all tides. They need him to be able to be a player that can be spammed in the passing game, that is going to give you high productivity, that is going to dictate coverage. He's not that player right now. The beautiful thing about it is, physically, I think he can be that player. If you have a question, please shoot it in the chat. Show's going to last probably another couple minutes, 5 minutes. We're going to get on out of here. I wanted to give you a quick program because I knew I had something scheduled. I want to thank everybody that's hopped onto the program. Please like and subscribe to the show. Please share it to all Steeler Nation. But right now, they need, and George Pickens has been challenged by the new wide receiver coach. They need George Pickens to be his very best self next year with in a new offense, with a new coordinator, with a new quarterback. They need him to be his absolute very best self. They need him to be more than a vertical guy that makes tough contested catches. He has to round out all of his game. Again, for as much as we say the Steelers need a number 2, they need Pickens to emerge as well as a number 1. They don't need it to be potential anymore. They need him to be the guy. And Mike Wolf said it right. I don't think we've ever heard, well, nobody works like AB. And also, that might not be a bad thing either, because you don't want anybody to be as crazy as AB as well. But speaking of AB, I mean, when you want, what is a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL? That is Antonio Brown during that 6-year streak where he was absolutely all world. There was a year where he almost got 200 targets, had about 135 catches. He got spammed. He caught the ball everywhere. Because point blank, in a game where you're only going to play 60 snaps on average on offense, you have got to get the ball in your playmakers' hands. And you've got to have playmakers. You're going to get about maybe 10 to 12 drives of that. You're probably going to punt on 4 to 5 of those drives and score touchdowns only on a few and kick field goals. So you need dudes. You need guys to emerge, and you need to be getting the ball in those guys' hands. That's why George Pickens, as much as it is important for the Steelers to go out and possibly get a Brandon Ayuk, if they don't, or even if they do, they have to have George Pickens be his absolute best self. What's up, Big Mel? How you doing, my brother? Mel, my nephew was going to HU. You know what that means. I ain't even gonna say it. My brother, my nephew is going to HU. I'm not even gonna say what that means, but big up to my nephew who's going to HU. You know what that means, Mel. You know what that means. Great to have Mel back on the show. But right now, I mean, there's a lot of questions in the Steelers offense. That is my concern when I look at the Steelers going into this new season. New coordinator. Can George Pickens elevate his game? Do they have a number 2? Who's going to start at right and left tackle? The rumor is Broderick Jones is at left tackle. There's going to be a competition for right tackle. Let me jump into this comment from Mike Wolf again. Thank you, Mike, for your comment. He said last year that AB was with the Steelers. He caught two TDs and almost single-handedly won the game in New Orleans. Speaking of that game, pick up to that, Mel. Hit me after the show, man, or hit me. You know how to get in contact with me. Get me your niece's name so we can put them together when they get down to HU. In that game, just to think of it, he was going up against, I forget who he was going up against. He was going up to Marcus Lattimore, I believe. He was going up against Marcus Lattimore of New Orleans in that game. And he absolutely torched Marcus Lattimore. He made a catch. That game, might have been one of the best games I've ever seen a football player play. In that game, AB was absolutely outstanding, and he was an absolute freak of nature. I don't think George Pickens can ever reach that level. I don't think many players will ever be as good as AB during that 6-game streak. But if you ask me, is George Pickens a number one wide receiver right now? Absolutely not. Does he have the physical capabilities to be that? Absolutely. He has number one physical ability at his size, his speed, his run after the catch. Yes, he could do that. Where he has to improve in his game, to me, he has to get more separation, and he has to run more of the route tree. He has to be a threat at all 3 levels. I got to be able to give him a bubble screen. I got to be able to throw him a dig, and I got to be able to throw him deep overs and 9 routes. He's got to do everything and be able to catch the ball everywhere. And before we get out of here, I'm getting a draft question. What do you think about the UConn coach turning down a Lakers job? I think he was smart. Nobody in their right mind would want to coach LeBron James right now. LeBron is out of control. Ego's out of control. And I like Bronny. But look, if you played 20 some odd years and were arguably the greatest ball player of all time, you want to listen to a coach? Hell no. That's why I wouldn't take that job. Bobby Hurley's a legend. I mean, come on, man. He getting paid enough, and he lives in UConn. He's chilling, and there's no way, he's not going to be able to coach with LeBron there. That's why he doesn't take that job. But with that, I want to thank Ian for the attempt to hop on. Ian will do it again. Hope everything's good with Ian. Hope everything is good with all of you. Mel, make sure you hit me. You know how to get me. And make sure you share that information about your niece. And congratulations for your niece going to HU, going to the Mecca and the home of DST. And so thank you, everybody, for hopping onto the program. We're going to conclude the show. And right now, Pickens is not a number one, but I have confidence that he can be. And I think the Steelers will need him to be a number one. But with that, we're going to conclude the show. Go Steelers.